Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars The Clone Wars episode review. This one's going to be for Season 7, Episode 6, Deal No Deal. So we're at the second episode of this second arc of the final season of The Clone Wars, and this is of course the second sort of Trace slash Rafa slash Ahsoka episode. That's our team for the episode. Overall, I think this is it's a better episode than the first episode of this arc, so last week's episode. But I still think it has the overall general issues that the first one did, of just this arc not quite, I suppose maybe being, I think, what a lot of fans really wanted from this, in that it's more a plot about Trace and Rafa than it is a plot about Ahsoka. It's this arc right now is more of just Ahsoka happens to be involved with Trace and Rafa, and a plot is happening to them, and Ahsoka is eventually going to do something, rather than what we sort of needed, which was more of a hyper focus on Ahsoka, character arc, character development, really delving deep into how she defines herself, her time as a Jedi versus her time now not as a Jedi, and how she feels, and does she need to go back to it. They're the questions we're asking, rather than, oh, is she going to help these people or not? And look, we'll get to something eventually. Obviously the big sort of action, I suppose, is going to really start with next week's episode. Here was once again more of building up to something happening. And again, I think this is again going to be another one of those episodes like last week, where people are primarily only really going to be talking about a scene or two, and it being the few scenes that actually reference the content that we're looking for. Which last week was the whole I learned to fight for my brother scene, clearly referencing Anakin. In this episode, it was, where did you learn all this stuff? Skywalker Academy. And then, very notably, when they're flying off Coruscant to go to Kessel, you have them pass by the ship, which is later revealed to, of course, be, Anakin's sort of ship. So you get that force sort of connection moment as they go by. And I think the way they did it was really nice, in that no dialogue, just Anakin sensing it, cutting to Ahsoka clearly sensing him, and just no real emphasis as such on it. They didn't try to point it out that they're both shocked that they found each other. It's more oh, no, there was nothing. It was significant that Anakin didn't send someone to get her or something like that. That he acknowledges the conversation they had back at the end of season 5, and is accepting of her decision right now, which is fine. But then it's going to be okay, so how does Anakin suddenly get back involved with Ahsoka to be there to ask her to do the Siege of Mandalore or whatever? That's still what we're waiting for in this arc, is to make that happen. But it was a nice scene though to have, but again, they're being very light on what I think most people feel the arc should be. Because the only, I think, real complaint about this arc overall is just that this is the last season of the Clone Wars. We only have 3 arcs. We got Bad Batch, which was an arc we'd already seen before, so pretty much one arc was always going to be not as exciting as the other one. And so the hype was on the 2 Ahsoka arcs. The setup for her coming back, and then her back in the Siege of Mandalore, the finale. Now we're halfway through that middle arc, and I don't think has quite delivered what we need. This would be perfectly fine in a full season of the Clone Wars. We had 20, 22 episodes, whatever, and this was just an arc in the middle of something. That would be fine. Because, of course, we know that this Ahsoka, on her own, there was meant to be, realistically, 2 or 3 arcs that sort of featured Ahsoka before she came back. And I think it was meant to be more of a long-term arc, whereas now they had to settle on, we'll focus in on just one of these and we'll have to do. And I'm worried that it's just not quite going to fully come together, because in many ways, like, it feels like we've almost skipped over the important time with Ahsoka on her own, because like time has passed. I think there's around like a year or something like that has passed since she's left at this point, or something along those lines. It's definitely not just like super recent. Um, so I think we were more looking for maybe Ahsoka within those first couple of weeks. Just what does she do? How does she find herself? Whereas now it's like she still talks. She mentions at one point in this episode that she like doesn't really know exactly where she's going or where she's heading. And it's like, okay, can we get into that? No, it's the thing she doesn't want to talk about, but they're also not informing us about, like, in any sense of like where she's been all of this time. Like, what was she doing at the start of the first episode of this arc before the bike dropped out of the sky, and she happened to basically fall into this plot. That's where I think a lot of the confusion is, in that like we get another setup, basically a build, another whole episode building towards Ahsoka needs to use the Force to get Rafa and Trace out of a situation. This time she uses Jedi mind trick on one of the Pikes to get them to hand over the money. Obviously the plan doesn't go ahead completely, and they are captured by the end, but she did use it. Trace sort of thought it was interesting, but didn't really do anything to put it together. I'm assuming they might reference that again when they come to talk about this, and I assume Ahsoka is immediately going to... Eventually is probably going to have to reveal her full scope of her powers, in that like she will probably assist them in escaping. But again, I'm not entirely sure exactly where the arc is going from here. But yeah, like I said, like outside of just that, I don't think this is really delivering in the way that people want it to. I don't think it's quite meeting the expectations that people have for the final season, for us being halfway through the final season. Like, there is only 6 episodes left, and it kind of feels at this point that there's so much pressure now on the last 6 episodes to deliver, after the first 6 have been very much episodes you would class as being good. We haven't had any bad episodes yet, but nothing has been like blow away. Nothing's been incredible just yet. So we need to get those episodes delivered, for sure. But yeah, the main thing that continued here is that, like, look, I do like Rafa and Trace. There was some nice dynamics, especially when they were on the ship. The 3 characters interacting with each other. There was some fun, back and forth about the whole situation of like the different characters that you have, of Ahsoka clearly being the most knowledgeable and the most skilled, and in many ways like the most intelligent, but she's holding back because she doesn't want to come across as being the hyper well traveled Jedi that she is, and that realistically she should be in command of like everything that they're doing. So she has to more hold back and more be like, oh, I sort of know about this because of this, so trust me on this bit, but that she can't go in any more on others. Trace is meant to be our sort of more naive character, where you really have a lot of like hope for her. She could have so much potential if she was in a better position. And then Rafa, of course, is getting a bit too heavily involved in these sort of criminal activities to make things happen for the sisters. And Ahsoka beginning to really notice that kind of the more kind of slight, I don't want to talk about it like too negatively, but the way Rafa is talking to Trace, of it's kind of being a little bit manipulative, of just like, I'll get us through this, just trust me on this, that I'll do it, that we can only trust each other. And it's kind of like, okay, this is where, Ahsoka is playing an important role here in terms of, coming between Trace and Rafa in, I suppose, the right way, of having Trace being more able to sort of think for herself, of like, Rafa, her plans may be helpful ultimately to you, but there is a better way to do things, and so, just think about it. Of course, what we get in this episode is Trace sort of more focused on her ship. What is it? What was it called? The Silver Angel is what they call it. Again, I don't think that's too bad of a name, so I don't really know what the multiple jokes were about that. that felt a little flat in that doesn't really seem like that bad of a name, and that like we know angels are like a thing in Star Wars. Like I think we saw them in a Clone Wars episode, and then of course Anakin mentioned them in Star Wars Episode 1. So, the idea of an angel isn't crazy. Silver, is there really a problem with that color? I'm not really sure. So that just was a bit like, okay, the ship has a name and we're joking about it for some reason. Okay. Like they could have come up with something a little sillier if they really wanted us to believe that it was a bad name. Like I like the dynamic that they ultimately went for of like Rafa doesn't really trust Ahsoka, but they sort of end up bonding over like, oh yeah, we both think the name is kind of silly. But yeah, the plan here is that they basically end up that Rafa gets them involved in running spice, basically. So we've had talks in the Clone Wars and stuff like that about spice. It's basically drugs in the Star Wars universe, but here they go a little bit more in depth in terms of like it's not just a sort of like illegal like addictive drug. Like there are uses for spice where it can be refined either into illegal drugs or into medicine. So Ahsoka, the way she was talking, got across the idea that what the guy was saying about it being medicine wasn't like a lie. It can be used in that way, and that's what she ultimately wanted to do with it. Again, like it's a pretty, I suppose, basic plot in the grand scheme of things of just here is the job that Rafa gets them that gets them too in deep with the criminal underworld, and they don't have control over the situation. Like Rafa is good at managing sort of low level sort of thugs and plans related to that, but they completely underestimate the galactic sort of gangster style things. So like they didn't know that the Pikes were actually this well known sort of species, sort of family of gangsters, basically a sort of an equivalent to the Hutts in a way. They didn't really know that, and Ahsoka had to inform them about that. And they're gradually beginning to figure this out in that, like, yeah, Ahsoka is beginning to reveal that she knows a little bit too much about everything. She knows about the different lanes of traffic, of, like, military lane, transport lane. She hasn't told them that she's also a very, very good pilot, and we as the audience are like, if you want a pilot, just let Ahsoka fly it, but she can't suddenly reveal herself to be also an expert star pilot as well. Trace has to fill that role for now. Yeah, like there's some nice moments here of just Ahsoka being the sort of like the moral character in all of this. Rafa representing more the willingness to do the criminal stuff, and then Trace being more the naive character who just wants to fly, kind of be free. So with these two characters, I am interested to see where they just leave off the arc with them, in that we know by the end of this, Ahsoka's going to be pushed off to Siege of Mandalore. But I hope they manage to find something with these characters. Now, I don't know what exact way they're going to do it, because she's going to have to reveal that she's a Jedi to them, and their reaction to that is going to be somewhat telling. Will her willingness to help them change their minds on the Jedi, or what? Will she manage to help them in some way by which they're in a better place going forward, or are they just going to still live in 1313? So that's the thing in all of this, is that like, is it going to end up being some weird coincidence where somehow like Anakin happens to be on some sort of a mission where he ends up saving Ahsoka, and the reveal comes out, and in the process of saving Ahsoka, he also saves them, and they end up in a better position just kind of through happenstance or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but like, I think they've done enough with just these two episodes to where you do care about Rafa and Trace. You want to see where they go. Like, you'd like to see Trace like maybe start in some sort of an academy. Like, they specifically mention academies there, that there's none down here, and the way they're talking about Trace is that like she does have so much potential if she could get the right training and so on. So is it going to be something along those lines of like, might Trace, I suppose, if they do encounter the Republic, like she might be sort of like drafted into like one of the, like that's where it's weird, because like it's the clone army, and like while we do know there is like some sense of the military outside of the we know there's some sense of the military outside of the clones. Like, would Trace go into some sort of like fighter pilot academy or something else? That's where it's a little bit harder to figure out, because while the focus is very much on the two sisters at this point, the arc is eventually going to get more Ahsoka focus, and so you don't want them to you want them to get the balance right, basically, between both sides of the story. Right now, it's probably a little bit too much focused on the sisters and not enough on Ahsoka, but it's still a good arc. There's still, I think, potential here. I just really hope that over the next 2 episodes it does deliver. And definitely from like brief episode descriptions that I've seen for the next 2, it does look like the next 2 are the more impactful parts of the arc. But then we're into the final arc, Siege of Mandalore, which the only thing with that is that I hope they have some sort of setup for Darth Maul, and it's not just that they like assume everyone has read that comic. That's one of those bigger things. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But yeah, they're my thoughts on Season 7, Episode 6. Give me your thoughts on this episode in the comments below. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.